Hey guys, today I'm going to show you how to create a contact form using HTML and CSS. The purpose of this is to expose you guys to many form elements that are available to us and how we could use them to provide some value to our user. So I included some of the form elements that you would see on an actual web form. And we're going to use just HTML and CSS to create this. This is also mobile responsive. As you can see, if I extend this, we're going to be using the CSS grid to make this happen. So let's get started, guys. We're going to be using Visual Studio Code here, and we have two files open, index.html and stylesheet.css. So I'm going to generate the HTML boilerplate by typing in Shift-1, Enter. And if you guys don't have this extension called Live Server, you'll want to download this so you guys can follow along. So I'm going to right click and open this with Live Server. Okay, so let's give this a title of form. And let's get started with the HTML. So before I do that, let's link the CSS so I don't have to worry about it later. So this section will act as a container. And then inside here we're going to have an H2 that's going to say contact form. And then we're going to have a form here. And inside the form we're going to have a section. And this section is going to be the grid container. So each HTML element will have its own row unless we specify otherwise. Let me just... So this will have a class of grid and form container. So in here we're going to have the first and last name. So since we're designing this for mobile first, we're also got to keep in mind that when it comes to the desktop we're going to be writing CSS media queries to adjust the styling. So in here I'm going to have another section, give this a class of name section, and also this will contain the class of grid as well. Grid is just going to hold the style of display grid, and I'll show you guys that in a little bit. I just want to get the first form element going. So here we're going to have a label, and inside the label we're going to have first name, and in the for attribute, which I'll explain just in a little bit, we're going to have first name, and then we're going to have an input of type text. We're going to have an input of type text, and we're going to give this a name of first name and an ID of first name as well. So the reason why we have for attribute and the ID attribute the same is that if I click on the first name, it will highlight the text box. So now let's give it some styling so that we can kind of get the background and the container the way we want to. And we'll also apply the grid here. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is in the body, we want to change the background to 313,234. We want to get rid of the margin and padding, and we want to give the overall body text a font size of 18 pixels. And then the H2, we're going to add a border bottom of 2 pixels solid 444. And then the container. The container, we're going to reduce the width to 85%. And the margin, we're going to add an auto to left and right, and we're going to push it down top and bottom 50 pixels. And we're going to give this a background of EEE. And let's give it some padding as well to push everything inside the container. Okay, and let's give it some box shadow. So box shadow 2 pixels, 10 pixels, 18 pixels, 0. And let's do EEE. That's too much. Let's do RGBA. 0.75. Okay, and let's add position relative, because we're going to add a submit button here, and we're going to push it to the bottom and to the right, and we're going to use position absolute to hold that position, so which is going to be relative to the container. And then we have a grid class here, and we're going to just apply display grid. Okay, and then we have the form container, and this is our default form layout, which meaning we're going to add grid template columns and one fractional unit. So any row, any form element we have, it's always going to take up the whole row, unless we specify otherwise. So in the name section, like I said, we are going to specify grid template columns here, but since we're doing mobile first design first, we are going to just leave it at 1 FR. And then we're going to write a media query later where we change that. Okay, so that should be it for now. So I'm going to give a little bit of styling to how the label and input are displayed. So here we're going to have a div container. In here we're going to have two div containers, one to hold the label and one to hold the input form element. So here we'll have a class of form, let's do label. And the parent div container should have a class of form, let's do row, like that. One more div, and this is going to hold the input form element, or whatever form element we want to put in here. So here we'll just say form element. So now let's place the label inside the label div, and if I do Alt Shift F, it'll do the styling for me, so I don't have to do it manually. Perfect. So now I'm going to give some styling to these classes right here. So for now, the form row, we are going to give it a margin, push it in a little, of 10 pixels. And then we're going to give a margin bottom to the label. We're going to push down the form element just a little bit, give it more spacing. And now I'm going to give a comment here that's saying form element styling, just so you guys can keep it in your notes for later if you guys want. So we have a class of form element, and we're going to specify the input. So here we're going to say a width of 100%, and we're going to say box sizing border box. Okay, and we're going to give it a little bit of padding, and we're going to give this an outline as well. 2 pixels, solid, 444. Okay, so if I click on this, it will see how it kind of focuses it in. And also, I'm going to turn autocomplete off in the form, so we don't want to see anything that's pre-filled. We want to manually enter it in. Also, in the form element input, let's get rid of the border. And I'm going to give this a background of E8, E5, E5. Okay, and that should be it, guys, for that. So we just added our first element, so I can type in anything. I can't press anything or enter anything. So let's do that so you guys see how that works as well right away. Okay, so we're going to add a button here, right, inside the form, but at the very end, and it's going to be inside. No, it's not going to be inside the section. Okay, so we're going to have a button here, and we're going to just say exclusively type button. We could say type, actually not type button. Let's do type submit. So every time we click it, it will submit the form. If we do type button, then nothing will actually happen. So we're going to say submit here. We're going to give this a class of submit. Okay, so let's style it. So right above this form element styling, we'll apply the class submit, and then in here we're going to set the position to absolute, and then we're going to apply it to the bottom and to the right. So we'll do 10 pixels and right 10 pixels. Okay, so now see how it's overlapping the element. So we want to push down the button by a lot. So in the form row, actually not in the form row, let's do it in the form container. Let's say margin bottom by 50 pixels. Perfect. So let's change the background here. Let's apply the background and give it the same one as a background we gave to the body, 313234. And let's get rid of the border. And let's give the color of EEE. And let's give it some padding. 3 pixels top and bottom, 12 pixels left and right. Okay, and let's give it a little border radius. Let's do 3 pixels. And also, if you hover over it, we want to let the user know that it's clickable. So we're going to add cursor pointer. So when you hover over it, it's a pointy symbol. Alright guys, so now if I type in anything to the first name and submit, well, as you guys can see here, we're getting some value in our URL. So I'm going to explain that now. So in the form, we have 2 attributes, method and action. So I'm going to explain the method first. There are 2 methods in a form, get or post. So if you use get, what it's going to do is it's going to add the key and value, which is the first name form element, to the URL with the value. So as many form elements that we add, it's going to add it to the URL. And that's probably not always the best thing to do, especially if you have sensitive data like a password. So what you want to do is use post if you have sensitive data, which means you're going to send it to a server, which means that the post data will be stored in the HTML body. So, but for this purpose, this tutorial, we don't have a server-side language set up, and we don't have a server set up locally. So I might do that later and show you guys how to do that. For now, we're going to just use get. And now the action. So if I do /, what that means is it's going to send it to the same file, which is index.html. So if I do that, type in something first name, hit submit, it'll submit it to the same URL. But let's say I wanted to submit it to a different one and show you guys how the output would look like. So I'm going to create a results.html file. And I'm going to type in here results.html. Okay, so let's say I typed in something for first name and hit submit. It's going to take me to results.html in here, and it's going to have first name in the URL because we're using get. So just for this purpose, I want to show you guys how to actually access that URL and get the form values and display them on the page. So here we're going to have a div, and we're going to give this an ID of form result. And now we're going to add a little script. So this script, we're going to have const URL params is equal to a new URL search params. And in here, okay, and then after that, we want to just get the params data. So we will call this const just params data is equal to URL params dot entries. So now we have the entries for what the form values are. and we're going to call the div right here by its ID. So I'm going to simply just say let div equal to document.get element by ID and form result. Now I'm going to loop through and output what the form values would be. So I'm going to loop through these entries. So I'm going to use a for loop for pair of entries, not entries, it's going to be params data. Inside here, we're going to get an array with the pair, which is going to hold the key and the value of that individual form element. So we're going to say div.inner HTML plus equal, and we're going to use back template strings here so that I can simply write the variable inside the template string without having to use any concatenation. So here I'm going to have pair 0 index, which is going to be the key, equal to, it's going to be outside the curly brace, pair index 1. Got it, forgot the curly braces. Also guys, this is going to be a method that we're calling, not just an object. Hey guys, so one thing I forgot to put is this actually takes in a parameter, which is windows.location.search, meaning that takes the URL from here and puts it in here. So let me just kind of go over this. So we get the URL search params, we loop through them, and then we just output them using the for loop. Okay, so now that you guys can see, we get the first name key, and then we get the value of what we entered. And just to let you guys know, this name attribute is very essential in your input form elements. Any form element you have, anything you want the user to type in and enter, you always want to add that name attribute. It's the easiest way to get the form values. Alright, so now we can create as many form elements as we want. So I can just copy and paste this with ease, and inside the same section I'm going to paste it, and I'm going to do Alt-Shift-F in case you forget, and I'm going to format that and then add last name here, last name to the for, last name to the name attribute, same thing with the ID. It's kind of tedious, but it's good user experience. So if I click on this last name, it'll outline the input box for me. Same thing for first name. So let's say I type in some data, hit submit. Perfect. Let's do one thing here, just so we can always see it clearly. Let's add some p tags. Okay, there we go. Alright, so on to a little bit more exciting things. Let's work on street address. So in here we don't need a section because street address will always just be its own row. So here we're going to have this div form row, and then we're going to just switch out everything for street address. It's going to be this type text as well. Okay, I'm going to copy that, paste it in the for. And then also add it to all the different attributes. And I probably won't do this for all of them just to save some time, guys. But I'll do it to the ones that are different form elements besides the inputs. Okay, so now we have a street address, guys. So as you can see, it'll auto-populate. And if I hit submit, it will get the street address now. Alright, so the next thing, that's pretty short and simple. It's the same thing as we've been doing. Now the next thing we're going to do is show the city, state, and zip code all in one row. So in here we're going to create a section of its own. Give it a class name of, let's do location section. And before I give the CSS styling for the grid, let's just create the 3 different form elements. Just going to copy and paste this 3 times. Alt Alt-Shift-F. Okay, so this will be city. This will also be city. And I'm just going to leave the ID, and I'm probably not going to put the for attribute anymore. Okay, so let's do the same thing for here. And this is going to be state. So state is going to be a drop down. So I will have the for attribute here so you guys can see how it works with the drop down. Type, so we're not going to use an input text box here. We're going to use a select. Inside the select, we're going to have several options, and so we're going to have the name here, which is going to be state, and let's give it the ID of state as well. And let's give it some options. So let's give it some states. Texas, Texas, and let's just copy and paste that one more time. And let's do California. And let's give a blank option too. That's default selected when the form loads. So option, no value, and we're going to give it two attributes. One is disabled and the other one is selected. So on default it will be empty, and when they click on the drop down they will not be able to use it. So let's say I click on state. So see how it outlines the select as well. So let's give some styling to the state select form element now, and let's put all this in one row after I do that. So I can come down here and select, so in the select we're going to have a padding of 3.5 pixels. The next thing, we want to also keep the outline consistent with the other elements. And let's also make the width 100%. And let's give this a background of the same thing of the form element, input element, E8, E5, E5. Okay guys, now let's make it all in the same row. So under name section, we'll have location section. So if I'm going to apply grid template columns, I'm going to say 2 FR, 1 FR, and 2 FR, which is fractional unit. And let me see, did I apply that? That should have, oh, I forgot to apply the grid class to this section. That's why it's not working. Alright guys, cool. So the padding is a little bit too large here. I can reduce that a little, but as you guys can see, now it's on one line, and I gave more space to the city and street address should be zip code. I'll change that in just a second. Let's reduce the padding here. Still a little too much. Yeah, that should be fine. I'm going to just do 1.5. Okay, so let's change the street address. And we're going to have zip code here. Get rid of the 4. Don't need that. And in the name, we'll also do zip code. And this is going to be type number. So I want to show you guys the type number one. And here, since we're only expecting a number, let's say we're just in the US, the user cannot type in any letters. We're forcing them to type in only numbers. And there are several other attributes in here that you can also add, where you can force the user to type in a max or a min length or max length. So let's say the max length of a zip code was only 5 digits. If the user tried to type in anything more than that, it would give an error. It would not. Sorry, max length is not going to work with number. It will work with only text, type text. So with type number, you can give a max. So let's say with number you wanted to force the user to only type in, let's say, 5 characters. You can say max length 5 and max length 5, and it will not let them type in anything more than 5 characters. Now they can type in letters here, but what you could do is add a little bit of validation, which is just HTML validation. And here you could say, you can give a regular expression. So you can say 0 through 9 only plus. So let's say you try to submit that. It's going to say, please match the requested format, meaning it's only expecting numbers. There you go. So I don't really want to get into form validation in here too much. I just wanted to show you guys that there are attributes to these form elements. And I will make a video on client-side form validation using JavaScript after this one. So yeah, let's change this back to number. I like number. You could obviously validate the length in JavaScript after the user submitted it. But let's go ahead and fill out this form just so you guys can see the values. Let's do Houston, Texas. And let's do zip code. So as you guys can see, we get all the values. All right, so the next thing we have is a phone number. So we don't need to put that in its own section. We are going to simply copy the zip code and format it. Okay, here we'll have phone number. And here I split it up into 2 different input boxes just to show something different and how, if you wanted to do this, how it would be possible. So here it would be for the area code only, and here would be the rest of the phone number. All right, so the way we're going to do that is we already have one input box, but we're going to add another one. So this, let's say, will be area code. We're going to add a placeholder, and let's just give an example of what we're expecting input-wise. And then we're going to say input type text. Sorry, not type, text. And this is going to be, let's say, just phone. And let's also add a placeholder here. And we'll do 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so in here, let's add the class called phone inputs. Okay, so in here, in the styling, we're going to go below the submit button, phone inputs, and we're going to use Flexbox. Okay, so now we got them on the same row, and let's add a little minus symbol. So I'm going to add a span tag with the minus symbol and give it some styling and create some margin between the minus symbol. So span, margin. So this is going to be left and right. So 0 top and bottom. Let's do 20 pixels left and right. Okay. And also, there's no reason to have this first input box to be this big. So what we could do is phone inputs. We can use something called nth child. So phone inputs nth child 1, which means it'll grab the first input, style only the first input. Reduce the width. Let's do 30%. Sorry. So this is not going to be directly by the class. It's going to be the input. So we're going to grab the div for the input class, div class, the parent class of the input, sorry. And then we're going to get the input and call the mchild, which is the first input, and then reduce the width to 30%. We could make it smaller if we wanted to, but this is fine. So let's say I typed in number. It's submit, you get the area and the phone number. And it wouldn't make sense to validate each of those separately, I guess. You would probably want to validate it all at once, or you could validate it separately, whatever your preference is, whatever's easier. Okay, so after that, we are going to work with dates. So let's copy the zip code one again. Put it right below the phone number. Okay, I'm going to change this to date. And change the type to date as well. Change the name to date as well. If you click on this, you'll get the current date. You can also change the year. So not too bad. So I just want to show you guys some cool input attributes that you can use that are pretty valuable, I would say. So you can give a default value. So the way that this formatted is year, month, day. So 2019, 07, 31. So let's say the user doesn't enter anything for the date. Well, it'll have a default value of that. Let's say you want to have a range for the user to select a date from. So we can say min, and we can give a date of 0701 and a max as well of 2019 07 21. So see how it autofills 07 in 2019? So it takes the min and max, and then when we hit that, it grays out everything we can't select and only lets us choose within the range, which is pretty cool. Pretty good use of forcing the user of what you're expecting. Okay, so let me submit it just so you guys can see what the format. So in the format, you get year, month, day. You would want to use JavaScript to obviously rearrange that. Okay, so the next thing is we're going to have a text area. So text areas are pretty common in forms, especially with like a leave your feedback type thing or something like that. So or tell us about you, something like that. We don't need an input here. We're gonna use text area, and we're just gonna have the name and ID. We don't even need, oh yeah, we'll give it an ID. So the name will be text area, and I'm going to also copy that for the ID. And let's also give a for attribute so you guys can see how that works. It's the same way. So if I click on it, it outlines the text box, and as you can see, you can resize it, but I don't really like that, so we're going to get rid of that. So let's give it some styling. So you're going to come down here, text area. The width will be 100%, and let's add the resize none, so you can't resize it now. And let's give the background to be matching everything else, E8, E5, E5. Okay, let's see, this should be 100%. Okay, yes it is. And let's give this a min height of 150 pixels. Yeah, that's too big for this. Let's do 100. Alright, so if I wanted to type in here and hit submit, there you go, there's our text area. And I wanted to apply the style outline here to keep it consistent. So if I click on that, boom. I think that's it for the text area. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to introduce radio buttons, which are pretty useful. So there are radio buttons and there are checkboxes. So there's a difference between the two, but they look very similar. So here I'm just going to have radio. And okay, so the radio buttons, we're going to have 3 radio buttons. So we're going to do this a little differently. We don't need to... Okay, so here we're going to say favorite contact type. So actually we're going to ask them, select your preferred, sorry, spelled that wrong, choice of contact. Okay, so in here, in this div, in the form element, we're going to have 3 radio buttons with labels. So we're going to have input type radio, and I'm just going to copy this, paste it 3 times. Okay, so the name attribute, so I said that radio buttons can only be selected, only one can be selected. You can't have multiple selections. Now, if you want to keep it that way, you need to give the name attribute the same for each attribute with the type radio. Okay, and we're going to give a label, and let's give this label email. And we'll fix the styling after I create the labels. Let's do mail here, and let's do phone after. Okay, and each of these will have IDs and 4 attributes, because I want to show you guys how that works. And this will be phone. So in these IDs, we'll also match that. And email. Okay, so let's fix the styling real fast, because the input, I gave a generic input styling to the form element. So let's do input type radio. Let's get rid of that outline. So now we have our radio buttons, and another thing we want to do is we want to reduce the width of this. We don't want to have it at 100%. So we want to reduce it. Let's do like 50 pixels. Okay, so now we got them on the same line. And this is probably confusing, guys. Let's do it the other way around. Okay, that looks a lot better. So let's say I click on email. So if I actually click on the text itself, it will select the radio button for me because I have this 4 attribute. If I did not have that, it would not select it. So let's say I want to choose email. If I hit submit, radio is equal to on. Why is it on? Because we did not provide a value in the input. So we want to say value is equal to email. And we want to do the same thing for the rest of the 2. So after doing that, if I submit it again, and let's say I click email again, hit submit, and it's still on. Let me see, let me refresh that. Okay, so now it's showing email. Probably just needed to refresh it. So we're going to do the same thing with checkboxes, and we can select as many as we want. So I'm going to copy, okay, I'm just going to copy this text area one. We don't want to copy the radio one because it'll be a little bit different. We're going to use a field set which will include the checkboxes. So we don't need actually any of this because the field set will let us have our own label. So inside the field set, we'll have a legend. Inside the legend, we're going to ask what your favorite sport is. Okay, so in here we'll have an input type checkbox. And also, we want to give the same name attribute to each and every checkbox. Okay, and also we're going to give these IDs. So the first one is going to be basketball, and the value will be basketball. And then we're going to have a label right underneath the input. And we're going to say basketball and for basketball. I'm not going to add a for every single one. So since you guys get the idea, if I click on basketball, it'll select the checkbox. So I'm going to copy this and paste it 3 more times. And I said I was going to get rid of the 4, so let me just do that. And let's change these as well. Let's change this to football. And let's just copy that. the value should be football. This should be, let's make this soccer, get rid of the 4. And let's get rid of these IDs as well. We don't need them. Okay, for this value, we're going to change this to soccer. This value, we're going to change it to, let's do baseball. And let's change this to baseball. And actually, let's keep these all lowercase. It doesn't matter, but just when you're getting values, it's fine. Okay, so we should have all that. Okay, so in the field set, I'm going to give some styling to it. It's a little crowded in there. So field set input, I'm going to give it a margin of 10 pixels. So it's a little, it has a little bit more space, but let's add just a little bit more. Okay, that's fine. And we don't probably want to do that. So let's keep it at 11. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so let's say I selected these. Let's select all of them. Let's see what happens. So I get 4 different form elements of sport and all the values of that checkbox. And not form elements, guys, 4 different form names. Not different form names, but the same form name, but with different values. Sorry. Need to explain that better. So after we get the same name with the 4 different values, we can, let's try just selecting 2 of them. So we get 2 sport names with 2 different values. And I will show you guys in the tutorial next that I'm creating to see how we can validate all these field boxes. It might not be the same exact form, but it'll be all the same input types. It'll be easier to do it one at a time, so it's not so confusing and overwhelming. Okay, so after the field set, we have 2 more that we got. File uploading and something called a data list, which is like a drop-down / autocomplete, which is pretty awesome. So let's copy the zip code text area, and let's insert it below here. Okay, so get rid of the for attribute, and let's put here, let's do favorite internet browser. Okay, so in here, we're going to have an input, and it's not going to be a type of anything. It's going to be a list. And that list is going to have a name of browsers. And we're also going to give this a name for when we submit the form. That we will always have to have. Now we're going to create an HTML tag called data list. We need to give this an ID that matches the list of the input. So this will be browsers as well. And now we're going to give options, but it's not the options from the select that we had from the dropdown. They're self-closing tags like that. And it's going to close it for me, which I don't. And we're going to give it values. So first, let's do Google Chrome. I'm going to copy this and paste it 3 more times. Okay. And in here, let's do Mozilla Firefox. And let's do Edge and Opera. Okay, so let's say I wanted to type in. So as you can see, it pops up already. It was a super long list and I wanted to type in. So if I type it in, and also you can hit enter and it will also submit the button for submit the form for you. That is one of the things about putting is as type submit. You don't have to do this in JavaScript by pressing enter, like setting that up. It's already done for you. So now back to the browser, we get Google Chrome as our value. Okay, So that's pretty simple. You can also click on that, select whatever you want, and you get your value. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you guys, which is pretty important, it is used a lot, is the upload file type. I mean, you guys apply for jobs, right? You guys will see that there's a upload resume button. So in here, we're gonna say upload file. And I'm gonna show you guys something different here. Two different ways of showing this, of styling this. So we can simply say input type file. And let's say name is file. So we can click on choose file, open up the window for us, the folder window. Okay, so we can give some attributes here. So we can have an accept attribute, but let's say I only wanted them to upload MP4. Now this doesn't force them to upload only MP4, there won't be any error when they submit, but if they click on choose file, automatically it will select MP4 format. But here you can still go to all files, click on that, it's a JPEG, submit, and you'll get the file JPEG. Okay, so let's say I wanted to just do all images. So I can do image / star. So now it's going to say image files. So it's any type of image file. You click on it, submit, and you get your image file. Well, there it's just showing the file name, but if you look in that file object, you'll get a lot more data. Okay, and I want to show you guys one more thing with the file. You actually don't even need the form element here. Inside the label, you can directly put the input in here. Now, in our CSS, we can say input type file, and we can simply say display none. So what happened? So that is displayed to none. So in order for this to work, you need to actually have the for attribute here. This is where it actually comes in handy. And you need to have the ID here of upload. So it needs to match. So let's say if I click on upload file, it will actually open it up for me, hit submit, and there you go. Now you don't actually see any file that gets uploaded here like a preview, so you could actually do that dynamically using JavaScript if you wanted to. Alright guys, so now that we have completed the form, we want to add some CSS media queries to make this mobile responsive. And I'm not going to do a whole lot to make it super responsive for the desktop, but I just want to show you guys some examples. So if we have at media, screen, and max, let's do min width. So anything above, let's say 700 pixels. What we want to do is get the first and last name on the same row. So we have that name section, right? So we can say grid, template, columns, and we can say 1FR, 1FR. So let's say if I extended this, it will actually be on the same row now. And also another thing is when the window gets bigger, the form gets bigger, we want to reduce the width because there's no point of having this large form on such a big, desktop size. So another thing we can do is let's create another one. I'm just going to copy this, and let's change the screen size for when we want to reduce the width. So let's do 1100 pixels, and we don't need this. In the container, we can simply reduce the width to 50%. Let's try that. That might be too small, but let's see. Totally butchered container. Okay. Yeah, it's not too bad. I would probably make it a little bit bigger. That's really all I wanted to show you to make it mobile responsive. But what's important is that it's responsive for the mobile side first. And look how easy it was to make it responsive for the desktop. So using this approach is really helpful at times and makes your life a lot easier in the long run, so you don't have to put in more work in the future. I hope you guys have gained some value from this, learned something new. If you have, please like and subscribe. I'll be creating my next tutorial, which is going to be client-side form validation. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.